Hello, ladies and no, right? Yeah, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Olga Scher. I work for the German business daily Handelsblatt as a EU correspondent, and I'm very happy to welcome you today to our EPICO event, The Road to 2040. As we all know, the EU Commission released at the 6th of February the communication about the 2040 targets, and it was one of the best kept secrets I think for the beginning of the year. So we, as least all we journalists, were wondering what's at the end about. And now we know that the EU Commission set a 90% target for the reduction of the net GHG emissions by 2040 compared to 1999. And so today we want to have a deeper look at the target and also how we will or how we could get there. So I'm very happy to introduce you to our panelists today. But first, I also wanted to mention that it's possible to ask questions also for you. Either you can raise your hand or you can just write them down into the chat and I will read them out at the end of the discussion. So, but now I will introduce you to our panelists. So first, Ottmar Edenhofer, I'm very happy that you could make the time today. He's professor of climate economics and also public policy at TU Berlin. And he's the director and the chief economist at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, as well as the director of the Mercator Research Institute on Global Commons and also climate change. So I'm really happy that you could make the time today. And I'm also really happy to introduce you to Olivia Gibner. She's working for Webgehögstra, so I'm really happy that you could make the time also today. I'm really interested in your focus, of course. She's focusing on EU climate policy and also the Fit for 55 packages. And then I'm more than happy to welcome Holger Lösch from the German BDI, Bundesverband der deutschen Industrie, where he's the Deputy Director General of the BDI. And also Bernd Weber, founder and CEO of EPICO, Climate and Innovation, the German think tank who invited us all today to come together to discuss the 2040 targets. But first, I want to give over the floor to Ottmar Edenhofer, who will share a little introduction presentation with us. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Can you see my screen and the presentation? Good, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. And I would like to highlight a few things about the path towards EU climate neutrality. And let me highlight one important aspect here. I'm not here as a professor or as a director, so I'm just here as the chair of the European Scientific Advisory Board on Climate Change. And I will present two reports. The one is on our 2040 target, and the other one is on our progress report on the policy gap. So let me highlight this, and also in the discussion, I will basically argue along the lines of our report. Of course, I have much more opinions that are expressed in this report, but I try to be aligned with the consensus of the European Scientific Advisory Board. So I would like to make 3 points. The first is I would like to explain you a little bit how we have derived our EU 2040 climate target and explain a little bit the rationality behind this. Then I will say a few words about the EU Commission's communication, and then I highlight and explore a little bit what we did in our report on the policy gap report. This is not a report about new targets. It's not a report about more ambitious pathways. It's just a report explaining what are the gaps between the already agreed targets and the implemented policies. And of course, I highlight how to overcome this gap. Now, let me start with our first report, which basically was requested by the European Climate Law. The European Scientific Advisory Board has to propose a target, and then the EU Commission has to take into account our recommendations, which should be based on the best available science. This is a little bit the context, and it is also in the European Climate Law that within the 6th month of the first global stocktake, the Commission shall propose a 2040 target, and this is what we did, of course, based on the best available science. So this is a complicated graph, but let me guide you a little bit through the whole thing, because this is fundamental in order to understand our report. We distinguish between two categories. The one is the feasibility of the pathways, and the other one is the fair share. And we felt that this is very important to have a clear distinction between these two dimensions. The feasibility is about the technological feasibility, economic, and also to a certain extent the social feasibility. This is what we explored, and we have evaluated fundamentally 1,000 scenarios within the IPCC, and it turns out that in the end only 7 scenarios survived, and these 7 scenarios has been filtered, and then we come up with the following conclusion, that the EU greenhouse gas emission budget should be between 11 to 40 gigatons CO2 between 2030 and 50. The emission reduction of 90 to 95% by 2040 relative to 1990 is consistent with this budget, and this range considers multiple dimensions of feasibility. So then you have the fair share, and within the fair share, this is based on normative judgments, on justice principle. It ranges from equality per capita to taking into account historical emissions. I don't want to go into the details. We as scientists, we don't feel that we are in a position to come up with one justice and fairness principle. We felt that we have to explore a multitude of different justice and fairness principles. And what you can see is that even if you have the most generous fair share principle, so there's a gap between the feasible pathway and the fair share. And we have identified at least 3 steps to overcome the gap of this fair share. The first one is that we need carbon dioxide removals after 2050, but also post 2050, we have to come up with net negative. Before 2050, our task is net zero, and after that, net negative. And in addition to this, mitigation has to be supported and facilitated outside the EU. So these are basically the 3 steps how to overcome the gap between the fair share and the feasible pathways. So highlighting the carbon budget for 2040, and also to come up with this minus 90 to 95% does not mean that everything is determined. There's a room for decision. And this is something which we have highlighted in the report. We distinguish between different iconic pathways with different characteristics. The first one is a pathway which has a strong focus on demand-side solution, less resource-intensive lifestyle, lowest final energy demand in 2040, the lowest reliance on carbon removals. But even a pathway which has a focus on the demand side solutions does not relies also to a certain extent on CDR. It cannot be carried out without CDR. So then we have a mixed option pathway. This exhibits the lowest cumulative emissions in the 2030 to 2050 period. It has the greatest deployment of carbon removal, specific focus on sustainable land-based removals, and it has also a strong increase in the contribution of nuclear power over time. And then we had analyzed the third pathway with a high renewable energy pathway, the largest greenhouse gas budget within this feasible budget, a high renewable energy deployment, highest deployment of non-biomass renewables, and the highest rate of electrification by 2040. So this just shows you that setting a target and agreeing on a budget does not determine the way how we do achieve it. And I think this is a good message, because different member states in the EU have different options to achieve this. And I think this is important to highlight this aspect. Now, let me say a few things on the European Commission's 2040 communication. So in the end, they come up with roughly a 90% reduction. This is in the communication, the option 3, and this leads to the lowest greenhouse gas budget for the EU. It is the only option that corresponds to the advice of the Council. It minimizes the total greenhouse gas emissions we put in the atmosphere and is in line with the provisions of the European climate law to present a greenhouse gas budget that does not put at risk the EU's commitment under the Paris Agreement. So this is how the communication has taken into account the advice of the Council. Now, this report has been published last year. So this year, at the beginning, we have published another report, and this is the policy progress report. And here we have analyzed all the relevant sectors: energy supply, industry, transport, buildings, agriculture, LULUCF. And we did this in this context of a broader understanding of cross-cutting enabling conditions. And let me highlight that we analyzed the pricing emissions and rewarding removals. This is important because we felt two fundamental principles have to be applied. Pricing emissions according to the polluter pay principle, but at the same time, suppliers of carbon sinks should be rewarded. Just transition and public engagement, finance and investment, innovation, governance, and also investment in skills and capacity building. So this is, again, not a report about new targets. This is something which identifies the gaps between the needs and the already implemented policies. And this is the fundamental main message here. The main message is it is very likely that we can achieve the 2030 target, the minus 55%. But if we take into account the projections of measures of the member states, it is very likely that we will not achieve the 2040 target and we will not approach the net zero by 2050. So this is very important that we need additional policy measures, and not in the sense that we need new targets. We need new means, new measures, which has to be implemented. And what are these measures? Here we identified the measures according to the two important dimensions. So now or well before 2030, and then, so to say, after 2030, and measures which are suited towards a minus 55 net reduction, and then also towards the net zero. So it is important to, I could go through the whole list, but it seems to me that it is worthwhile for this discussion to highlight the following. The first one is the strengthening of the governance and the compliance framework. The second aspect is make the EU emission trading scheme fit for net zero, address energy and material demand, and also expand emission pricing to all major sectors, especially agriculture and or food and the LULUCF, and incentivize the carbon removal. So this are, from my point of view, the huge challenges. So now I basically leave a little bit what we have done in the report. And so with all the caution, I would like to highlight here an important aspect. Many people think that dealing with CDR, with carbon dioxide removal, is a long-term thing. This is nothing which we should take care now because we have so many short-term issues which are important. Here, I would argue this is an ill-framed way to think about the end game, because we are in the middle of the end game, and let me explain why. So the EU ETS cap will go down to 0 roughly in 2039. This basically means then we have the net zero line. But still, we will have residual emissions, unavoidable residual emissions in the hard-to-abate sectors. It is important for the investors that they know what will happen with the residual emissions. How will the residual emissions be compensated? If this is not clarified yet, and if we do not stabilize the expectations of the investors, then there's a huge risk. So the EU ETS will lose the liquidity, the prices will increase, and this could destabilize the whole process. Therefore, it is important to integrate the CDR into the ETS, and this should and could stabilize the market. But at the same time, with this pathway, so the best what we can achieve with the ETS is net zero. But as I mentioned in the beginning, this is not good enough. We need not only net zero, we need net negative. And the crucial question is, how can we achieve net negative? And this is the $1,000 question, or the 1,000 euro question, which we have to answer in the next in the next few months. So there are two fundamental approaches. The one is create two separate systems, have a carbon dioxide removal incentive scheme, and then basically the ETS. The other one, integrate them in a reasonable way. So we have not achieved a consensus within the board. We are working, which basically means at PIC, at the EMCC, working very hard to come up with a convincing regulatory framework. This is not mature enough to be presented publicly, but this is something which I would like to highlight. And I think in the next few months, we will see a debate on these issues. And I hope that this issue and this debate will produce more light than heat, and not the other way around. One aspect is also important, the agricultural sector. The agricultural sector in the EU is the only sector which has stable emissions since 2005. And at the same time, we see a rapid decline of the EU's net carbon sinks. So this is an ongoing process since 2010. And this is something which we have to really take care, because the rapid declining EU net sinks have the potential to undermine the 2030 target. So with that, let me conclude, the European Commission puts forward a 90% net reduction target by 2040. This level ambition is needed to deliver EU's commitment under the Paris Agreement. The work is far from done with the target setting. It must also be brought to life by implementing concrete actions that deliver real-world emission cuts. And moving towards the 2030, the EU and its members should swiftly close the implementation gap by bringing the Fit for 55 package to life and phasing out fossil fuel subsidies, and think beyond 2030, expanding emission pricing to all major sectors, setting up a pathway for CDR, and engaging in carbon market diplomacy should become a key building block for the EU climate action. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Edenhofer. So first of all, for this really good introduction, I think we can just go more into the details right now. But first of all, I would like to hand over the floor to Olivia. Really, as I said, really happy that you're here today. And I would really like to know how you did discuss this report in the cabinet of Höxter.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, first of all. The Scientific Advisory Board is a key input for us. We review it, discuss it also with the researchers. And as I think was also mentioned for the 2040 target, it was really a guiding kind of basis of analysis that we were using. And that's why the final recommended pathway of 90% was chosen, also to stay in line with the recommendation by the board. So maybe if I can just add a couple of elements. I mean, thank you, Professor Edenhofer. You already highlighted some of the elements of the 2040 target plan, but maybe to bring it back to a little bit the political level as well, because one of the questions we get a lot is, why did we put this target forward now? And for us, it's moving towards climate neutrality is not only an imperative, but we also want to show that it's feasible and desirable. I don't want to say too much about the effects of climate change, but as you know, they've been accelerating. We have already had temperatures above 1.5 degrees last year. The European continent is warming faster than the rest. And in the communication and the impact assessment by the Commission, all these elements are reflected on in great detail. So the climate imperative is, of course, there. There's a legal obligation for doing this. The European Climate Law, which actually puts the European Union's ambition into legally binding obligations, asked us to come forward with this intermediate target for 2040, following the global stocktake in Dubai, which took place in December. That's the second element. And then, of course, from the economic perspective, I think from the beginning in 2019, we've been clear that the European Green Deal is also a long-term strategy for economic growth and investment and innovation. And a lot of investment will be needed. And you can see this also in the communication and the assessment, where we've been trying to be very clear what will be costs of the energy system and the transport system, but also investment needs. And the majority of these are investment needs, and replacing, for example, what we spend in the EU on fossil fuel imports with investments in green technologies, in, for example, the renewables sector, in hydrogen, in the grids, which are long-term investments. But we need to mobilize this money, public and private money, and we need to give clarity and predictability to citizens and businesses. So that's why we wanted to be absolutely clear also with this communication that the EU is going to stay the course, and that the investments that many of our companies have been making are continue to be valid, continue to be absolutely key, and continue to be a cost-efficient solution. So these kind of signaling elements to the sector, to the financial market, I think was another very important element for doing this now rather than waiting. Going forward, and here I'll quote my commissioner, who always says we have to stand firmly on two legs. So one, of course, the climate ambition, but the other being a just transition for all in terms of our citizens, but also our businesses. And for that, we need the help of technology, of course, but also of innovation. Maybe a couple of elements on the analysis. So in it, we've been absolutely clear that the 2030 framework and policy that has been put in place at EU level for climate will continue. Nothing can change. We have to implement it. This is also a call to the member states to hand in their final national energy and climate plans, which will really add up to the 55% reduction. Secondly, you will see that there is, so to say, no dogma. The economy as a whole has to reduce emissions, the industry sector, the energy sector, but of course also the agricultural and food sector. We know that this is very, especially the sector is very sensitive, and we see it. We have more, I think, protests coming here on Monday. So we understand that there are concerns, and yet also, as Professor Edenhofer has said, it's the agriculture sector that also will have to contribute. It's unique in a way because it has both emissions, but also can provide a carbon sink. So there are several business cases that that can be developed. Just to mention two elements. One is that there's a strategic dialogue at the level of President von der Leyen, exactly on gathering and input and ideas for how to include the agricultural sector more in this effort. But also quite concrete things, like on Tuesday, we've concluded the negotiations between the Parliament and the Council on a carbon removal certification framework, so which will put in place reliable, high quality methodology to certify carbon removals, and by that also providing farmers with a very clear business case. Other elements that are important and which show a very technology open approach are the role of CCS, of course, CCUS, the role of all kinds of energy sources, but also I think the second element, which is very important, is the whole question of social impact, social transition. And here I think we have to do still a lot of work, of course, at the EU level, but here we also need, of course, the national, the regional, the local level to support and to work in the same direction. One important and key element, and this came up in a discussion 2 days ago, is the whole question of skills. So how do we get the right kind of skills in the right regions? How can we help people train? How can we help people change sometimes also their level of skills, and make that really coordinated with the requirements we have in terms of the innovation and industry. Another element is, of course, how will vulnerable households deal with, for example, higher costs sometimes for or pricing carbon in the transport and building sector. Here we'll start implementing the Social Climate Fund as from 2026, which is surely a way in the right direction, but this will have to be also complemented by national and regional efforts. Finally, maybe let me reflect shortly on the whole element or the whole concept of competitiveness, which I think for anyone who has read the communication, you will see how dominant it is in terms of the reflection, because we need to, as a Commission, as a EU, find clear answers to how the EU can stay competitive in a global clean tech race. Key elements here, of course, the question of energy prices. That's not necessarily linked to our climate policy, but it's simply a reality of the European continent, so to say, in terms of our resource endowment. But so concrete support to the clean tech innovation, but also to some of the industries that will need to adapt once the energy intensives, but then of course everything that's clean technology, green hydrogen, etc., where also there's a clear role for the European level to be played. So in conclusion, the communication shows a vision and a possible beginning of a plan. The exact policy architecture, etc., is consciously left to the next Commission to also get their ownership. With the communication and impact assessment, we want to show that it is feasible and that we have everything that it takes, but now we have to sort of align it around the economic opportunity and the realities of the EU and its member states. So with that, maybe I'll close for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Olivia. And I think we will get more into the details into a second. But first, Mr. Weber, what's your opinion on the 2040 targets?
Yeah, thank you very much, Olga. Well, I think my first comment is that I welcome the targets. I think it's an important waypoint towards climate neutrality. It's providing us also with more certainty, as was mentioned before, certainty for investment, and this right ahead of the European elections. So I think this is good. Another aspect I would like to underline is getting us closer to net zero comes with a benefit also in terms of resilience. which I believe is much needed if I take a look at the multiple geopolitical conflicts around us and also the energy and supply crisis that we have faced. So I would agree with what Mr. Edenhofer dubbed fair and feasible target. I would probably use a slightly different wording. I think it's coherent. It's a coherent target when it comes to the Green Deal, to the European climate law, but it's also challenging in the sense that when we add up the current policies, they only lead us to a 51% reduction in 2030. That is 4 percentage points below what the climate law foresees, not to speak of the 2040 target. So yes, there is an implementation gap. And I think the first litmus test, if we are actually willing to fill this gap, will be indeed the national climate plans of the member states, which are supposed to factor this in. So I'm really curious to see what will be tabled in summer and also the review of the European Commission later on. Then looking at the target is of course great, but setting a target is at the same time only one part of the equation, probably even the easier part if we are honest. What we really need is a coherent approach to get us there, and also a comprehensive approach in the sense that we need to deliver on our climate targets, definitely. We need to provide our companies with a competitive edge, be it with regard to clean technologies, but also in terms of manufacturing products. And we need to ensure social acceptance, and all this with a limited amount of public budget, which is why the question of efficiency is so crucial for the approach that we are going to adopt. Now, the good news here, I believe, is that we don't have to start from scratch. Obviously, Europe has achieved a lot in terms of decarbonization. And I think what we need to do now is to fill the gaps, but also to build on the strengths that we have already developed. And here, I think the emission trading system is really a central building block. It has been the main driver for decarbonization for the last decades. We have managed to extend it to other sectors, transport, building, and we have managed to combine it with a form of social compensation and support. And I think this is very important. And it's also the reason why other countries like Japan, Chile, or Brazil, they are looking into this and they are interested in adopting a similar model. Of course, as always in life, the ETS is not a silver bullet alone. That's clear. We need to address the high abatement costs in the transport, in the housing sector. We need supplementing support instruments for that. And of course, as it was mentioned before, it does not integrate all sectors. So thinking of how to extend it further, with particular with regard to agriculture, but also potentially carbon removals, is very important. Another building block that we already have and that we need to develop further, in my view, is the single market. It is a key issue. It is a key asset to drive down the costs of the transformation. I'm thinking here, for example, of a massive deployment of renewable energies, which need to be interconnected to bring electricity costs down. But it also needs to be enabled to develop future technologies more rapidly. Because the transformation that we need requires, as it was rightly said by Olivia, requires new technologies. And here, it's great to see that the European Commission is putting a special emphasis on carbon management, really important. But basically, we need these innovations everywhere. We need it in terms of efficiency, flexibility, direct electrification, industrial heat, and hydrogen takeoff as well. So I believe that we really need an industrial and innovation-oriented agenda for this. And here in Europe, we are really at the technological frontier. So it's important for us to focus on innovation efficiently in a competitive environment. And we probably also need to adapt our approach in the sense that we need less micromanaging and less over-regulation to accelerate the innovation that we need to get us to to the 2030 target, 2040 target, and eventually to net zero?
Hellosh, we heard it already. We need to be more competitive and we need a lot of investment. So what's your opinion from the industry side on the 2040 targets?
Yeah, thank you. Well, perhaps let me start. So I just spent 4 hours in the BDI Committee on Energy and Climate together with 90 representatives of all our sectors and many specialists on energy and climate from a lot of companies and so on. And there were like dozens to 100 questions, but not one on the 2040 target.
There might be a problem with the connection. I'll just give
So
it.
with dealing with the actual situation. So we have, especially in the industry, we have a very much declining production. You may have heard of BASF setting off a large number of people in Ludwigshafen and so on. So they are trying to understand the contract for difference scheme. They are trying to understand the power plant strategy. They are trying to hedge their energy prices and so on and so on. So what I would like to express is that well, we of course look at this, and as Olivia said, so we are engaging a lot in these discussions, but my membership, so it's more the short and medium term perspective, which is really counting at present. So these people ask themselves, is my company still competitive next year or next month or in 3 years or 5 years? And the question, what happens 2040 or even 2050 is not the absolute priority right now. What we take away is, of course, well, it's not a decision of the Commission, it's a recommendation to the next Commission. That's something which really has clearly to be distincted. What we see, of course, I've read the emphasis on more competitiveness. This is something we really welcome, because it has been, so the Green Deal has been promoted as a growth strategy from the beginning. So we developed some doubts about the balancing between growth and green over the last 5 years. So we see that there is more talk in Brussels now about bringing those things into a better balance. And I would say if the process is really focusing on balancing ecologic, economic, societal, and geopolitical interests, resilience, and competitiveness better. So this is something which I would say is the #1 target for the next Commission and, of course, for any next German government. We have seen that technology openness is a bit more. So this has always been better in Brussels than in Berlin, to be honest. We, of course, have seen that
What's unfortunately worse in Berlin compared to Brussels is the internet connection.
Carbon cycle, carbon. Oh, can you hear me?
Now it's working again. Thanks.
Okay. So, okay. Where did I stop? Yeah, technology openness. I think this is good, that it's more elaborated now. We at a first glimpse would say that the impact assessments, there needs a lot of work to be done, especially if you look at the questions of infrastructure and so on. So in general, I mean, we know the technicalities. There has to be a 2040 target, less than 6 months after the global stocktake we saw in Dubai. But the real discussion will start with after the European elections, and it will start with the forming of a new commission. And our wish is that we really get to a better balance between just looking at the technical target and looking at competitiveness and, of course, just transition acceptance. If we don't make these millions of investment decisions, if we don't make them happen, if we don't make them successful and feasible, so we're going to lose acceptance, and in the end, we are losing on the mission to get to net negative. And so this is, in a nutshell, the situation I would describe right now. But to be honest, so we at BDI look at this. I would say in the companies, in the more individual membership, the 2040 discussion is, well, I would put it like this, is not yet full speed on.
Thank you. And I think it's not only the industry with the upcoming elections at the latest. I think we also need to talk about the political climate. Bernd, how do you assess the chances of realization of the ambitious climate goals in this changing political climate?
Well, that's a good question. I think it can go either way, to be honest. So if I look at the relevance of climate action, of combating climate change, we see that this has really been at the top of the agenda. But something has changed with the Russian invasion in Ukraine. It's still high on the agenda of citizens, also of political parties. But it's probably not on the very top anymore, because there are other important issues that concern companies, that concern also citizens, increasing prices, the overall economic situation, weak economic growth, especially here in Germany, for example, security aspects that are related to energy, to climate, to industrial policy. So I don't think that we are necessarily losing consensus, although there is really a risk of a backlash potentially. In order to avoid that, and probably that's also a window of opportunity for this, we need a more comprehensive approach, I would say, which brings together the climate targets, but also a convincing vision, a convincing plan with instruments, building blocks for economic prosperity. And here, indeed, I agree with Holger Lösch. We need to talk about competitiveness, industrial competitiveness with regard to the future. We really need this competitiveness also because the future markets will be changing. So this is one important element that needs to be integrated into the equation, and so is social fairness. And here I believe the protests of the farmers display that quite clearly. We enter a new stage of the discussion. It's not only about bringing climate action to the top of the agenda. Now it's also about a certain kind of management, if you want, management in terms of regulating conflicts that will necessarily appear. So here it's really important to adopt a comprehensive approach. And what we need to emphasize more is indeed the innovation and the industrial aspect that we need, also for economic growth, for economic prosperity, and also the social component. And I think here it is important to signal that in the future, of course, the CO2 price is going to increase, rightly so, and we need that price signal. At the same time, this is generating revenues, and these revenues should not only flow into a public budget, but they should also be used, of course, for innovation, but also for compensation or for support of households, especially vulnerable ones, And it also needs to be used in sectors with high, hard to abate costs, transport and buildings in particular. And here I think the EU approach the topic smarter than we did on the German level, to be honest, because the EU started to talk about social climate fund before actually introducing the ETS for building and transport. Here in Germany, we have talked first about the costs of an increasing CO2 price on the national level, and then we postponed the climate premium, the Klimageld, and I think that created a lot of frustration, but also insecurity, and could actually have a negative effect on the social acceptance that we very much need. So I think factoring in the social dimension, factoring in also the competitiveness dimension is more important than ever in the future political environment.
Thank you. Herr Edenhofer, what are your thoughts on the political climate?
Yeah, let me say, let me make a few comments. The first, what I would like to make is that we should take into account that the climate damages. So this is not a minor issue. And so what we did here at our institute, we have updated now and we will publish this soon, the climate damages occurring by 2030 and 2040. And this requires a fundamental update because extreme weather events occur much more frequent and with a higher intensity. And I'm not arguing here that this is necessarily in Europe the case. This is in other parts of the world the case, but Germany is an export-oriented country. And we have to take into account that this climate damages will be important. So what I'm saying is, the fundamental thing is, the point that I would like to make is, climate policy is securing long-term prosperity. So this is not just a luxury good. It's ensuring long-term prosperity. It's about the wealth, and it is not something where we basically throw money out of the window. Of course, and I would like to come back to Holger Lösch's point. Of course, competitiveness is an important issue. But how should we address competitiveness? And I think you can do this from two perspectives. The one is, you could say, we can increase the competitiveness to relax a little bit the climate targets. This is not the argument Holger Lösch made, but just this is very often out in the debate where people say, okay, let's forget about the climate targets. Another way to do this is, we could say, we have to enhance international cooperation. And here the EU has done a very important first step with the CBAM, with the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. This is a very important step. It's not just a step securing the competitiveness of our own European industry. It is also a way to incentivize other countries to introduce a carbon price. And the CBAM, just the announcement of the CBAM, led to a debate in India on the introduction of a nationwide carbon tax. It facilitates a debate in Turkey on a national emission trading scheme. And in Dubai, I had many conversations with many delegations that officially we are against the European CBAM, but behind the scene, they feel this is something which they push them to introduce carbon pricing in their countries. And therefore, I think what the communication says about the carbon market diplomacy is very, very important. So this is a very active approach, and I think this is something which we have to work on to convince other countries to introduce the carbon price, because in the end, this is the way how we should deal with the competitiveness. The main emitters have to cooperate, and the main emitters have to introduce the carbon price. And one thing I would like to make, I'm definitely not an expert how to deal with right-wing populism. I wish I would be an expert on this, and I would wish I could give you a recipe to deal with right-wing populism. But what I learned so far is that one important factor is economic and social insecurity. And I think that's an important issue. So we have to work very hard over the next few months that policymakers come up with a reliable regulatory framework, and also to reduce the economic security, in particular for the industry, but also for the low-income households. I think that's important. And this is probably one way, not the only way, but one way to bring down the right-wing populism. And I think we have to understand this phenomenon a little bit more, and we expect, and we have to take that into account, that the next European Parliament will lean much more to the right than to the left. But on the other hand, there are basically it's a many-dimensional problem. And look at the agriculture sector. Farmers are currently really upset about regulation. They are really upset about when we start to say pricing of emissions is the way to go. But so we need a strategic dialogue with them also to explain for the farmers that carbon dioxide removal could provide a business case. And here I think that's the way how we should embed the whole debate, that climate policy is an important component to secure long-term prosperity.
Thank you, Olivia. So what can the EU do to explain in a better way what the EU is actually doing to the people outside?
Of course, we have to make every effort to communicate what the EU is doing better, but that's I think a general task for the European Commission, but also, of course, for all the other levels of government. And that's I was trying to emphasize that earlier. Yes, of course, the EU is setting the long-term targets, the overarching targets, because it simply makes sense that we coordinate that within Europe. But the implementation has to happen on the ground and has to happen in every village and in every city of the European Union. I think all the main elements were mentioned by the other people speaking. Two reflections that I can add on this, to what extent do we have the kind of popular support? Our surveys still say that for the majority of Europeans, this is a key issue. The majority of Europeans say they've taken active action against climate change in their everyday life, for example, in the last 6 months. And there is a huge generational element also of the younger people, but also parents, etc., seeing the issue, the overarching global issue, through a very clear lens. I sometimes miss that when we then just go on talking about the costs and the costs. There are, as Professor Edenhofer said, the costs to that we will have to pay, but also I think as a society, there's a moral question. Maybe on secondly, I would like to reflect on a different perspective. So we had already first reactions from industry, from leading companies. Just 2 days ago in Antwerp, there was a meeting between von der Leyen and the Belgian presidency of the EU. And they clearly formulated what they think an industrial decarbonization deal, which is on a pathway to 2040 and 50 climate targets, would look like, what it would need. And they give us very clear input. So I think working with these partners, working concretely on what it means for some of the sectors that are essential to the transition, listening to them and giving the support from the public level, I think is a key contribution that the European Union can give.
Thank you, Olivia. And it's great that you mentioned Antwerp, because I actually wanted to ask Holger Lösch, the Covestro CEO told me on Tuesday that we actually need kind of a business plan behind the Green Deal. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more. How could that business plan look like?
Well, I mean, EDI, long before the Antwerp paper, has done 2 very comprehensive studies on how to reach climate targets in a cost-effective and in a competitive way. So we did this in 2018 and we did this in 2021. I think those have been very, very interesting endeavors for us in BDI to get from the if to the how discussion very much. And we said basically it's possible. We described paths in which we could do this for all sectors, even including agriculture. But of course, there were a lot of caveats. There were a lot of questions and a lot of conditions which should be met to do this. And what we see, of course, over the last 6 years, that a lot of these preconditions have not been met. And therefore, we are, if you look at the number of 860 billion euros necessary additional investments for Germany to reach the 2030 targets, I think we are at much less than 50% achieved until now. We're doing another study right now, so we will have in a few months, we will have some more results on this. So what I would say is, what is important? First of all, Ottmar Edenhofer is absolutely right. And I'm saying this over and over again. First of all, a +3, a +4, a +5 degree world is not going to be a business paradise. This is absolutely clear. It's going to be a huge mess for humanity. And if you want to do business in such a surrounding, well, welcome. That's the first thing. The other thing I always say is, if you're wading through thick mud, and I would concede that this is wading through thick mud, what we are doing right now. So the absolute most stupid answer to this or reaction to this is just to stop. Then you are standing in thick mud. So what I would say is we have to find the most cost-effective, the most saving the competitiveness ways to get through. How can we do this? First of all, Ottmar Edenhofer is absolutely right. A level carbon playing, a global level playing field. So I mean, there were times when BDI asked for a global carbon price. Ottmar Edenhofer and me and Christopher Balz wrote an article on this in 2015, I think. So this is not going to happen. But if you look at CBAM, what we see is there are two perspectives. I think countries are looking at this, and we, of course, hear that some of them think, could we use this, or could we implement some of this? Okay, that's the good version. The bad version is thinking about gamification, about changing trade ways, changing the way you export into Europe, or even cheating by giving your energy-intensive companies fake certificates. We see this with biodiesel at the moment. So this is something we really have to work on. The whole story was we are going ahead. We are gaining competence on green technologies, and all the others have to follow, and then we have an advantage. Now we see that others are going equal way or other ways. They are going ways into green technologies, but they do it a bit different. And I would say, and these are my two points. First of all, we should make things easier. So the way we are trying to incentivize, to regulate, to do transformation in Europe is just too complicated. So that's the first point. We have to make things much easier. Regulation has to be much easier, and we try to do everything 100% perfect. I mean, Europe to a certain degree, Germany to 100%. The other thing is, if this, and I'm very sure about this, this is the hugest or the largest challenge humanity has ever faced, then I ask myself why we do not try to really absolutely unleash innovation and investment. I'm very tired of long-term discussions about may it be a bit blue, or may it be more green, or may it even be pink with the hydrogen and so on. I see positive tendencies in Europe right now, but I mean, we would have to unleash innovation. This is the largest, the biggest challenge we have. and we are regulating it absolutely in detail. And I think in 30 years from now, I hope, perhaps me, hopefully my children, will look at a net negative world, not only Europe. This would not be a winner, and probably see a hugely different and much surprising technology landscape. And I think we should put a lot more emphasis on this.
Thank you. So there are already some questions in the chat right now, and I just want to mention you can also raise your hand if you want and ask the questions directly, but I will start with the chat. So there's a question, I think it's for you, Olivia. The communication has a part concerning circular economy. Should we understand that the EU continue to work on circularity and even accelerate the transition to a circular economy?
I think that's a clear yes, absolutely. Just to give examples, I mean, for example, in the steel sector, recycling much more scrap is a key element that's also been reflected in the analysis. And if you're interested to look more into detail into the impact assessment, we've also put forward something called a life variant, which includes more changes to the circular economy, to lifestyle changes, which also leads then to a cost reduction, of course, for the pathway. So we've tried to provide this kind of analysis and reflection to show really the benefits of this. But also broadly, I mean, within the European Commission, the circular economy path is extremely important and will be continued, of course.
Thank you. Another question, Bernd. Do you think policymakers perceive climate action as a way to structurally weaken Russia economically, as its economy is founded on fossil fuel exports?
Interesting question. I would probably turn it the other way around. And I'm fully convinced we continue our efforts in terms of climate action, but also in terms of transformation, we definitely increase our resilience, our security. Because what we need is a sufficient and reliable supply of electricity, of course, of fuels and technologies, supply skills in general, meeting our demand in a secure and I think also more and more flexible and efficient way. So I think it's definitely the right way to go for Europe in a more and more complicated, geopolitically complicated environment, including, of course, the conflict with Russia, but also in a more and more fragmented world economy with where we see these tendencies towards blocks. So it's definitely the right way to go. And maybe in this context, I would also like to pick up on what has been said about CBAM and the climate price diplomacy. I do believe that our international dimension to this is still a little bit underdeveloped, if I may. CBAM is definitely an important building block, but there is another one which I would encourage the EU Commission to leverage also, and this is the Climate Club, which has been launched in Dubai. And is it has departed from the initial concept of having, that was mentioned before, confronted with a reality check of waking up in a world where the major economies have a CO2 price signal. I think we won't see that anytime soon, but what we can do on top of CBAM and on top of what we are already doing is to foster collaboration with other economies in specific industrial sectors. I'm thinking here of steel. There's been a pilot launched on this, but also in terms of cement or hydrogen, where we come joint conclusions, joint standards, and also common projects. And I think this can help us to develop a level playing field, to ensure competitiveness, but also the offtake of these technologies. And I think that goes beyond what CBAM is doing and what a perfect world with a CO2 price signal in G20 or beyond would be. And it would also help us with the environment that we find ourselves in.
Thank you. Another question. Now, there are coming a lot of questions right now, which we really appreciate, of course. Would you support the idea of a new fund for industry, something like the European Industry Development Fund, which would be spent only on green technologies and green investments? I'm not sure who would like to answer this question. Maybe Olivia.
I think it's definitely something we would have to look into. At this moment, I can maybe plug an advertisement for the Innovation Fund, which is a fund that's resourced through the ETS revenues, so directly coming out of the carbon pricing system. And that's the closest we have to something of that sort. I understand it should go a little bit further, but I think here we've just finished one of the flagships, which is on a hydrogen auction. So the call for bids from hydrogen companies who pass in their bid together with the off-taker, and we will now rank them and award them to the most, to the best offers. So this is the first time we've done that, and it's the first time also we get a clear idea, for example, of the market price of the landscape that's out there. So these are the kind of innovative funding schemes that also the European Commission and, for example, Germany took part in this as well, are involved at the moment.
Radosh, your turn.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the fundamental questions. How do we finance all of this? And you've seen the discussion in Germany after the ruling of the Supreme Court. I would say that in general, I would wish for a much more integrated policy approach within Europe on energy policy. I mean, that's still partially a mess. All of these discussions about who is producing power by what and is this okay or whatever. I think there is a huge potential in much more European cooperation. And the same applies for financing. I know from a German perspective, any talk about a European fund is very detrimental because in the end, it's the Germans paying the biggest part of it. But I think we will need a much deeper approach into capital market union, banking union, and energy union. I don't see any way how we will reach these high targets, these very ambitious targets, without getting deeper into a European, how would I say, a deepening of the European project.
Bernd.
Thank you. I would like to make one important point, and I think we touched upon it earlier, what is really important to understand. We need to have a more efficient approach when it comes to the financing of all of this. And here, the major message really is that we need to leverage private investment. The money that we need for the investments that we need, Holger Lösch and the BDI have calculated it for beyond 800 billion until 2030, just for Germany. And it's very clear that the public budget cannot undertake this endeavor. So it really is about leveraging private investment and also to fill an investment gap that we currently see. So for this, I would see a few elements. First is indeed to make the existing instruments that we have simpler, more accessible, coordinate things better. One leverage that I would see is green public procurement. If we look at the public procurement in Europe, it accounts for 14% of the EU's GDP. That's a lot, and it can help us to foster and to establish green lead markets that we need. Furthermore, I've said it before, I don't think we will enter into a world with a lot of additional public money being available for this tremendous challenge. So we need to think in terms of alternatives, of subsidies, in my view. And these could entail tax incentives, but also public guarantees more and more. And I think here we should focus where we really see funding gaps. And I find these funding gaps first and foremost in small and medium-sized enterprises. I see them in startups. So the whole question of how can we make sure that we improve the bankability of companies, improve the bankability of projects? I think this is very important. And a last word, what we should not do is enter a subsidy race with the US or with others, which, by the way, could only be entered by Germany and France, I assume. When I see that we are spending 10 billion for a chip factory in Magdeburg here in Germany, 7 billion for the steel industry, that's more than, for example, a country like Latvia overall has in its public budget for government spending. So here it's really important that we find European solutions and that we don't embark on a subsidy race of member states.
Thank you. And we are already coming to the end of our discussion, but I would like to give everyone of the panelists a chance to make a really short final statement when you look what's coming for the next 5 years to the new Commission. And Olivia, maybe you would like to start.
Well, just to outline the next steps. So for us, we'll now, of course, eagerly look towards the elections. We hope that climate and the Green Deal will be one of the topics that people vote on and vote on, of course, positively. And then that there's a good mandate for the next Commission to continue the Green Deal as an investment and a growth strategy. In terms of the immediate planning, we think it will be, we put it forward for the first quarter of 2025 to look into this adjustment of the climate law. And then, of course, the policy architecture will be updated to really continue with the role that the Commission and the European Union has in terms of giving the direction.
Herr Edenhofer.
Yeah, I would like to highlight two aspects here. The first one is what the communication says about the carbon market diplomacy. I think this is absolutely crucial. And this is something which we should really push. And the second thing is, it's the white elephant in the room. This is indeed the agricultural sector. And there will be a huge debate on the CAP, on the Common Agricultural Policy. This has also a lot to do with development in the Ukraine and their agricultural sector. So this will become crucial, and this will change the whole debate and the discourse on agriculture in the EU. And one aspect, and this the last one, is this carbon dioxide removal strategy is crucial. Holger Lösch highlighted that this is not it's not yet on the radar screen of the industry, but I think it will become very soon appearing at the radar screen when it turns out that how to deal with the hard to abate sectors. So we are approaching at the emission trading scheme at the end of the 30s, the zero line, and we have to work very hard to make the EU emission trading schemes fit for net zero and fit for net negative.
Thank you. Herr Lösch.
Yeah, well, what would I wish for? Well, first of all, I would really hope that we use the European chance we have, so the European perspective, the European potential. And this discussion taught me again, I mean, this is, if you look at what Ottmar Edenhofer and all these other scientists are putting on the table, and the question, how we can translate and communicate this into a business logic for those who have to take these investment decisions. I mean, that's for me the key question. And of course, I would love to see a competitive and strong European industry by 2030, by 2040, and beyond 2050.
Thank you. And finally, Herr Weber.
Thank you, Olga. I think much has already been said. I fully agree with what has been mentioned before. If I have a wish, I would probably wish for more speed, especially when it comes to innovation. I think here we need to become better. We need to accelerate things. In Antwerpen for example, there was the idea of using sandboxes more frequently in order to take innovation forward. I think speed is really important, especially when it comes to innovation. Then I think pragmatism plays an important role. So we shouldn't fall back over and over again in very ideological discussions, be it on hydrogen, on colors, or other things, or with other states beyond the European borders. We can collaborate on these things for takeoff of these technologies more rapidly, in my view. And last but not least is the question of efficiency, and this relates to finance. This relates to the ETS, and it also relates to providing a framework for a business model for private investment decisions to be taken in the favor of Europe.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for listening, and I hope to see you soon again. Have a nice afternoon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.